it, break it, tell us what's wrong with it, and we'll do fixes. You can also import your own data. How many people have tried that? As you know, it's somewhat of a black art right now. After the incantations and the calling the wizards in the remote locations and making the trip to the Oracle, you finally get your data into some form that can be loaded. Much of what will happen in the next month or so is going to be getting this process under control and the goal will be to get 2 or 3 workflow scenarios that tell you step by step how to load a particular kind of data. Hopefully that will be enough of a framework that people can then modify those scripts to load the data. For those of you who've worked with the Oracle version of tranSMART version 1.0, you know that this has also been a similar process. There are some very nice kettle scripts that work once you understand how they work. And so it is possible to grow a local expertise with a little bit of pain. But once you have that local expertise, you will be able to load your data repeatedly and to load new data well. All right, what button do I push here? Need that one? Who do I aim it at? Next slide, please.
Left. There's a left and right button. You have the right.
Okay. Just some notes on some background on the current install. It still has the same prerequisites: Java, Git, Ant, Rails, PostgreSQL. You can, if you wish, configure it with JBoss with the I2B2 data. It's set up to either install that or to install the data, the all Postgres data set that we've created. And there are directions for installing a Postgres version of I2B2 on the wiki. You have to have Solar installed and P-Link. Then once you do that, there is a script. It's currently on the Hive's GitHub site, but there will be a copy of it on the tranSMART GitHub site shortly. There's a sample profile properties file that you have to edit. It does things like tells where is the Tomcat version that you're running on, where is the where do you want the data put when it builds the Postgres and stuff like that. And then once you've done that, you run the script and check the outlog, the log of that for errors, and that's a fairly straightforward process. And then you compile tranSMART app and install it on your Tomcat, and it works. And if it doesn't work, you can call it keys. No, actually, somebody was asking me how many developers are involved in this project. There obviously there are rings that cascade out, but I work daily on with an open chat window, and there are about 6 to 8 people that contribute to that chat daily. So those are the active developers. There's a core. That's what we call core tranSMART. There's a set of about 20 developers, including those 6 to 8 people. Then the next ring out, there are people who say, "Well, I can't work on it today, but I'll get to it next week." In pharmaceutical companies and in e-tricks and so that group of people is available to help you once you identify your local technical person. There is a core developers email list, that technical with probably about, I don't know, 50 people on it now, but we invite you to get onto that email list. We have weekly phone meetings where you can come on and listen to the chat. There is a chat window that you can get involved in. So the closer, of course, you want to get to the development, it's quite easy to get into that circle and start becoming a developer yourself. There's a plan for a final release in September. No new features from now out. And the reason for that is that we want to create an installation package that actually has demonstration data, documentation, and other supporting materials. We want to have adequate test data and test code and test scripts. And we want to have adequate documentation, both user and administrator documentation. And we want to have tutorials, and it's going to take a while to build those things. And so we need a stable version of the application to work against to build those. Now, obviously, I used to work with a programmer who said there are no bugs in this program. There are no bugs in this program. Obviously, there are going to be bugs, and you will probably discover them before we will. And you will tell us it doesn't work. And we'll say, why did I do that stupid thing? So we're going to have to do a lot of bug fixing. We're also being very aggressive in trying to build both automated and scripted testing. So automated testing for the software pieces, for the data communication, for the interfaces, scripted testing for the user interfaces to the extent that we can automate those user interface tests. We're starting to do that. Peter Rice has been working on taking some well-developed human scripts and trying to automate those. So we are working very aggressively on creating testing, and that's people at Imperial, people in my group, people at the Hive, other people. So I want to take. So that's the release. A beta release now, a final release in September, weekly running releases in between there that incrementally fix bugs. An announcement process that is going to be on the tranSMART Foundation.org wiki, which used to be the tranSMART project.org wiki, and looks very much the same because we just copied it over. So you can go there, you can find out what's happening. We'll try to keep it current. We've not been really great at that, but we'll try to be good. So that's the release process. I want to talk a little bit now mostly to my fellow developers about the release, the innards of that release process. We've been living up in this world for the last 4 months, the developers and some testing. We have to move out into these other roles. We're going to have to figure out how we certify releases, and that's something I would like to see discussed at this workshop. We're going to figure out who are the committers to the current beta version. That is, how do we control influx of bug fixes and minor feature tweaks and people who say, oh my God, I totally forgot about this one piece of code. What gets put into this ongoing beta release? So we're going to have to figure out how do we commit to that? How do we actually manage the weekly releases? And to be provocative, I hope, here's a narrative of that release process. The code is now frozen. Actually, there remain a few small things. We have to merge some branches in and actually label the version. Generally, from this point on, only bug fixes will be permitted. There will obviously be some non-bug fix commits that will have to be but they'll have to be justified, and we have to figure out some way of generating a consensus for those commits. And we're moving into what I would consider to be a testing phase. So we are working on installing test data at some well-known site, installing a test web application at some well-known site. We have continuous integration testing going on. For those of you who may not be familiar with the term, it just basically every time you change the code, it loads a new that it loads that in the version, compiles everything, runs all the automated tests against it, and declares that it doesn't work, sends you an email, and then you have to go and find out what's wrong, fix that. When you do the fix, you change the code. When the code changes, this whole process happens again until it declares that it works, and you're happy. This is actually working now. Folks at the Hive are under case are responsible for a set of core development software, and they actually very kindly put this up before it was even funded. It's been working for several months. And our chat is set up so that we get reports every time it fails, every time it succeeds in that chat. So the developers are aware of this automated testing. We're also, as I said, very aggressively designing tests. We have to figure out how, there's always the danger that if you write a test, you introduce bugs in the test. So we have to figure out how we're going to certify those. And we do have a version of a bug tracking system that will let us create those bug reports. And the idea is that those bug reports would then drive fixes to the versions, the release code versions that are going on. And again, speaking more to the developers than the general audience, we want to be sure that we have some way of separating the process of doing fixes from the actual code that's. So it'll be incumbent on the developers to create branches, separate branches. In fact, from a practical point of view, for long fixes, you would create separate branches, but from a practical point of view, you don't know if the fix is going to be long or short when you're starting it. And so you create a separate branch. I'm actually encouraging people to create a local fork in GitHub language, and then create a branch in that fork, and then push the branch back to us and let us do the merging. Whoever us is, that is the committee that handles the merge process and release process. But one thing you can do as a developer is to merge any changes that take place in your code, so that when you hand your code back to us, it will be easy for us to merge those changes back into. Okay. And we, as I said, we will report out releases in a large community. Any questions?
Is there any? Sorry. Is there an intended release cycle?
Is there any kind of
intended time frame for release cycles? So that we know.
Oh yeah, one week. And that's a desirable. Let's see what happens. That gives you a sense of it. You know? So we're talking about at least 8 release cycles, maybe a few more between now and the final release.
So basically, what we propose here is that if I have a bug fix, right, I create my own branch. That's how we're doing it. But then, in order to submit a pull request, should I merge it into master in my own master branch and then submit pull request, or how do what?
It would be better if you would merge the master into your branch, then do this the pull request. Then we can pull your branch and submit it into the master.
Okay. That's
Does that make sense among the developers?
Yeah, just to clarify, because you have here.
Yeah, the language here is I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. Okay, makes sense.
That's it.
Yeah. So you're talking about short notice, huh?
Yep.
But quite a few of the groups around here have developed their own functionality. Yeah? So these are the larger changes. Huh?
Yes.
So and I think most of us want to make that available to the wider community.
I agree totally.
But everyone doesn't want to bother very much about merging that. So how do we get that
I would
process
like
under
to.
control?
This I think is a great place to discuss that. What I would like to see is an overlapping, so that by the time this final release comes out, we're ready to make a beta release of the next version. And so, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. But we have to plan which features go into which versions. We have to make a roadmap of that. I think a large part of what this workshop is going to be about. And Steph, please bring your new features to the table. I hope you're going to have somebody in the developers track representing that. And let's get them on a list. Let's collectively make a plan to, I can't sit in my gray tower and say, it shall be solved. This is a community thing. Yes?
Is the intention to test on Oracle as well, or just Postgres?
I'm sorry.
Is the intention of testing 1.1 is only Postgres or also Oracle?
I'm going to, that it would be, in the best of all possible worlds, it would be both Postgres and Oracle. We are behind in bringing the Oracle version back up to date with the current Postgres. So I don't want to commit to the final release in September having the Oracle version in it. It's very close. So if you're concerned with bringing the Oracle version up to date, just give us boilerplates. What doesn't work in the Oracle version on the current code will give us a handle on how to drive that forward. Does that help?
I was just more understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just follow it. I think what we probably need from this group is to determine which platforms we're actually going to support long term. Because there are a number of us who've been using Oracle, and honestly, it's pharma here.
Yes, and that's
we probably would like to continue using Oracle, and we need to know whether or not we're going to have to prepare ourselves for potentially going to Postgres.
Yeah, the long-term commitment is to support both platforms, and what you're seeing here is a wave of the Postgres merge. What are we almost we're over a year into that process of coming up against reality. And what I can say from a technical point of view is the way the software is designed will not make it that difficult to bring the Oracle part forward. Which, as I said, we're just a little behind.
Again, it's something that the foundation is going to have to think about how we resource. If indeed we're going to make a commitment for both platforms, which I think would be ideal for certain people, for certain entities in the group, in this group, foundation with the individual member organizations are going to have to figure out how to make that happen, because I don't think it is necessarily easy, but obvious. I think it's going to take resources and work. We need to figure out, is it worthwhile to do it, and if so, how to do it. But I do appreciate the immediate commitment.
Yeah, at the moment, the 1.1 pretty much the biggest priority is on the Postgres.
Yeah, I understood.
I think what further developments should be considered.
And again, from a technical point of view, the way the code is set up, and this is something we can discuss in more detail in the track, but the way the code is set up, it's not that difficult to bring all forward. There will only be a few small changes in the schema, and the API between the database and the rest of the code makes it easy to bring those changes in.
You would also involve, because it might be a data warehouse, so that you also are going to support UPG or MongoDB or Emacs. Certain parts in Postgres won't work, or not.
So, and I did, yes,
Yeah, but if
absolutely.
it's outside the scope of
It's outside the scope of 1.1, obviously, throw my hat at the beginning of the meeting and said, no. But let me take that off for a second and say, the discussion among the developers is constantly about how do we create a framework in which we can bring in multiple types of data representations, multiple types of interactions for analysis, multiple types of ways of interfacing to tools and GUI interfaces, because all of these things are demands that are on the table. and they are part of the longer term pipeline. I think we will say a few things about this. But we would kill ourselves if we tried to do all of that now. And we are in a very precarious position of not having something that works. And so we're like a startup company where we're saying, you know, here is version 2, and here is version 3, and here's version 4. Don't look at version 1. And you are going to say, look, I've got to have something working tomorrow.
Terry, I think also that what you're saying is if there's interest from people here in an Oracle release, in 1.1 support for Oracle, then get involved, right? Don't look only to the foundation. The foundation is just there to put the foundation, and we are the community. So I'm sure Terry will be happy to accommodate more people in a release working group. If you can put in some resources to test the release on Oracle, we can probably work with the other, even the developer members in the group to make it happen. So even just testing would be great to have.
We can create, we have the power. The people in this room have the power to create the roadmap for tranSMART and make it stick. We're a large enough group that if we start to do that, it will be tranSMART. And so, and especially those of you in research who have needs that can be addressed by tranSMART core development, like the Oracle database, getting those onto the roadmap and getting them into the consciousness of this group. And this workshop is a wonderful place to do that, are going to be things that we can do in the next couple of days.
So, can't tell Dr. Martin. If anyone's interested in Oracle support tranSMART, then we might be able to help with that. So that's one of the reasons I'm here.
Oh, wonderful.
So please come speak to me later. One of the reasons I'm here is to find out how we can help.
Excellent. Excellent. You are now in charge. Here's the man to talk to about Oracle development and tranSMART, and he and I will communicate about how to get it done. And we'll have work. That's great.
It might be like say certification.
It is, and I can guarantee you that's the case. It is actually. Technically, it's actually quite straightforward. Just a matter of updating public schemas, getting the domain objects and Rails to match those schemas, and recompiling. You know, it's just one of 6 dozen things that are on the list, things to do that we haven't done. And then, it's behind.
I'd also say on the recombinant group, I would say 100% of our deployments are on Oracle, like production deployments. So on our side, we can make a commitment to bring the code base to, acceptable equivalent form on Oracle. It's just tricky. We have to make sure we're all coordinated.
Yep.
It's less about can we get it done? It's how. Right? Because we're not going to drop a whole bunch of groups up and running. They're not going to suddenly drop their database and go switch to Postgres. The cost will be far harder than the cost for us to merge. For any of the sites that we have to update. And a lot of the sites, unfortunately to some degree, are going to be a retrograde fee. If we ported their current capabilities to the 1.1, they lose all their features. So the real work we're going to have to deal with is the merging of the enhanced features of the API as the API grows up.
Yep.
The users aren't going to drop their features. Right? That's the work we have to get to.
Yeah. All right. So totally agree on 1.1.
Yeah, I agree with Dan. Actually, we have the same situation in something, right? Like 100% of deployments are in Oracle, and they are going to stay this way.
Yep.
Because farmers, they won't.
And I would love to see a 1.2 in the beta in the September timeframe and cover this. I think Dan's point is actually perfect. It's not a question of getting it done. stuff that's moved forward, and then we don't drop stuff that you've developed and stuff that your team has developed.
Yeah, and that will continue, you know, to, our plan is to switch to the master grade and make faster to make it work on our software.
Yeah, another motivation to keep this stable for people.
Make this an action item, meeting, right? What if Pfizer is willing to put the test record in for Oracle, recombinant Thomson Reuters, and Oracle, right? And Ketten have that. I think there's a lot of us that have some very clear ideas of how Oracle can participate in this process and really, really add value. And I think we should talk about that in the next couple of days. But so I think Pfizer can put in the test, can do the testing. If we can coordinate someone to do the testing,
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
one of the reasons
we're
why
happy to
I was-
participate to make this, make it a little platform, at least through one platform.
So let's, in the developers track starting tomorrow morning, we have a session where we talk about how to organize the developers track. Let's just form a subcommittee on the Oracle, and you folks can come up with a plan and get it on the whiteboard, and we'll get it into the consciousness, like I said, of the group. Yeah.
So how would that impact your release date? Adding Oracle support, how would that impact your release date?
So let me answer that question this way. I want to make releases.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to change the release date, but I would be happy to make another release in October. If it, especially if it brought Oracle in. And I would be happy to make another release in November. You know? So I want to release in September for various reasons, but that doesn't preclude another release immediately thereafter with more features. It's a question of, you know, if we have people working on that release, it will happen. And if that release actually came to the table before the September release was ready, and it didn't impact the way the documentation looked, or the way the tutorials looked, or the way the test data looked, I'd be happy to include it. But probably more realistically, we're talking about something that is more than the 1.1 release and comes to the table a little bit later. Let's do it, let's release it, there's no problem. I think I've overstayed my welcome. And
It's fine. It was a good discussion.
yeah,
Thank you,
and
Terry.
just so tomorrow morning we start the developers track, and come ready to you know, claim your stake in the process, and we will have a session where we talk about what we're actually going to do during the track.
All right, just one comment on what you said in your presentation, Terry, about the install